Every family has their little traditions, those seasonal rituals that shape the rhythm of a year and wrap themselves around memories like vines on a rusted fence, and mine was no different. Except for the part where it carved me out of the picture so cleanly you'd think I'd never been there to begin with. Every year, like clockwork, my parents would hang that framed family portrait over the fireplace, right above the stockings and beside the wreath made of fake pine and crushed egos, and every year, my face would be missing. I'm not talking metaphorically missing either. I mean actually, physically, digitally scrubbed out like I'd died, and they were too polite to mention the funeral. It started 10 years ago, maybe 11, but who's counting when the hurt smears together like fingerprints on a glass? That year, I came home for Christmas thinking maybe we could patch things up. Maybe they'd forgiven me for not becoming a carbon copy of my dad or for not kissing the ass of family legacy. I brought wine, the expensive kind, thinking that mattered, and I rang the doorbell with shaking hands, and I got met with the same tight-lipped smile my mom always wore when she was trying not to say something cruel. She let me in. She offered me cider. And then I saw it, my siblings, grinning like the cover of a Brooks Brothers catalog, all crisp sweaters and bleached teeth, and a portrait so recent I recognized the wallpaper behind them. It was the same living room I was standing in. I stared at it for what must have been a full minute before my mother said, "Oh, that? We had it done last fall. Just something quick for the holidays." Like I was the one being dramatic for noticing I wasn't in it. I didn't ask why. I didn't cry. I just drank the cider, said thanks, and left early the next morning like someone slipping out of a bad dream before the monsters fully formed. I didn't go back the next year, or the year after. But every Christmas, like some twisted tradition, someone would tag me in the background of their joy, the Facebook uploads, the Instagram stories, the annual family newsletter, and always, that same damn portrait would be front and center. Same smiles. Same fireplace. Same spot on the wall where my existence used to live. You ever feel like your absence is more welcome than your presence? Like someone decided your version of you wasn't worth keeping, so they redrew the scene without you in it? That's what it felt like every December, like being ghosted by the people who raised you. For a while, I thought maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe they just didn't think it mattered. Maybe I was being prideful, dramatic, or too wrapped up in my own story to see theirs. But that's the kind of thinking that keeps people stuck, always blaming themselves for the cut someone else made. I didn't ruin the picture. They just decided it looked better without me. And look, I wasn't a perfect kid. I was difficult, sure. I questioned everything, pushed boundaries, dropped out of business school to start something I couldn't even name yet. I didn't want the life my father had built, all golf club memberships and quiet dinners with clients who laughed too loud and thought too little. I wanted something else, something raw, something real, something mine. And maybe that made me a disappointment in their eyes, but I never expected that it would make me invisible. The worst part wasn't even the portrait. It was the silence. The fact that no one ever called to say, "Hey, we missed you this year." The fact that my siblings never asked why I stopped showing up. The fact that every year they sent me a card signed with love and hollow ink, like checking a box was the same as caring. The portrait wasn't just a picture. It was a monument, a declaration, proof that I had been edited out and nobody blinked. I know what you're thinking. Why does it still matter? Why let it eat at you? Because when you're a kid, your family is the lens through which you learn to see yourself. And when that lens distorts, it's hard not to think you're the one out of focus. But this year was different. This year, I didn't just stew in silence or drink too much bourbon and scroll through their joy like some masochistic tradition. This year, I decided to respond in kind, not with words, not with a confrontation, but with something they couldn't ignore. You see, they had one other tradition, too. Every Christmas Eve, without fail, they gathered around the TV to watch their favorite holiday program, the Alpine Christmas Special. I remembered it from childhood, all that fake snow and stiff acting and sentimental crap that made my dad laugh and my mom cry at the same predictable scene. They watched it religiously, like it meant something holy. So this year, I bought 6 seconds during the broadcast. 6 seconds of their precious primetime wonderland, right between a commercial for peppermint bark and some local car dealership dressed like Santa Claus. And in those 6 seconds, I didn't beg. I didn't cry. I didn't even say their names. I just showed them what they'd thrown away, and what I'd built without them. It always started the same way, me sitting on the carpet with Legos in hand, trying to build spaceships that would never fly, while my brother Nathan got paraded around the house like a damn trophy, all straight-ass and star athlete smiles. And my sister Chloe danced between recitals and social clubs with the kind of grace that made my mother beam with second-hand pride. Meanwhile, I was the kid who asked too many questions, who once told the pastor at church that Noah's Ark didn't make mathematical sense, who got sent to the principal's office not for cheating, but for challenging the curriculum in front of the other students. I wasn't rebellious for the sake of rebellion, I just didn't buy into bullshit, and that made me a problem early on. Our house always smelled like cinnamon in December, which sounds lovely until you realize it was artificial, scent sprayed by my mother every morning before the cleaning lady arrived. It was all for show. Every room was staged like a magazine layout, pillows fluffed with military precision, bowls of wax fruit placed just so, like a guest might walk in at any moment and need proof that we were a perfect family. And we almost pulled it off, too, until you looked close enough to see the cracks. I was maybe 12 when I realized I didn't belong in that portrait they kept hanging over the fireplace. Not because I was missing yet, no, not yet, but because I was always pushed to the edge, both literally and figuratively, cropped out by posture, shadowed by better lighting on the good kids. There was one year they dressed us in matching sweaters, navy blue with tiny reindeer patterns, and my collar was sticking out on one side, just slightly, but when I asked if we could retake the photo, my dad said, "It's fine, Tyler. Nobody's going to be looking at you anyway." It wasn't a joke. He said it casually, like he was commenting on the weather, and everyone laughed just enough for me to pretend I wasn't crushed. That moment buried itself somewhere deep in me, the way small humiliations often do, not painful enough to scream about, but sharp enough to never forget. After that, I stopped trying to squeeze into their image. I started dressing different, thinking different, becoming something they didn't recognize and didn't want to. By high school, I was known for being the weird Quinn kid, the one who ran a hacked laptop from a backpack and launched a school-wide protest when the administration blocked Wikipedia. My parents told people I was creative with the same tone you use when describing an incurable rash. Meanwhile, Nathan was already being groomed to take over Dad's insurance firm, and Chloe had landed a modeling contract with some regional brand that put her on billboards next to Christmas trees and new SUVs. I wasn't jealous, not exactly. I just felt like I was living in the wrong script, like someone had cast me in a Hallmark movie and then told me to improvise with fire. I got grounded once for skipping a family photo shoot. My dad said it was non-negotiable, and when I told him I had a coding competition the same day, he said, "No one's going to care about that in 10 years. The irony still stings. College was supposed to be my escape, and for a while it was. I got into Caltech by the skin of my teeth, scraped together scholarships, and bolted across the country so fast I didn't even say goodbye. My parents visited once, during freshman year, and left within 3 hours because the dorms smelled like feet and failure. I offered to show them the AI bot I'd been working on, and my mom blinked at the wires like I'd handed her a live snake. My dad just muttered something about wasting my potential and went back to checking his stock portfolio. We didn't speak for months after that. When I dropped out sophomore year to start my first startup with 2 guys from the robotics lab, I didn't tell them at all. They found out when an old neighbor saw a post online and called to congratulate them on raising a real maverick. That word, maverick, my mom repeated it like it was a diagnosis. "Why can't you just be normal?" she asked me over the phone, and I said, "Because normal in this family is pretending everything's okay when it's not." Click. End of call. I was 19 when the disowning really began, not official, not written in any will or said in direct words, but in 100 little decisions that added up to a silent exile. I stopped getting invited to birthdays. I got told the wrong times for family dinners. Once, I drove home for Thanksgiving and found the house dark, only to learn later they'd gone to Aspen without telling me. Nathan sent me a selfie from a ski lift with the caption, "Family first." That was the year I stopped calling. Not out of spite, but because the silence became easier than the effort. They didn't ask about my startup, didn't want updates, didn't seem to care that I'd been published in TechCrunch or got accepted into Y Combinator. And by then, I'd stopped expecting them to. I was learning to grow without their approval, like a weed through concrete, resilient, unwanted, but still alive. And yet, every year, I looked. I peeked at their photos. I lurked their holiday posts. I searched for signs that maybe, just maybe, they'd mention me. But my name was absent, like I was a mistake they corrected. I wasn't just estranged, I was erased. So when people ask why I did it, why I bought that 6-second ad spot on local TV during their favorite show, I don't tell them it was revenge. I tell them it was a message. Not to say, "Look what I've done without you," but to whisper, "I was here all along. You just chose not to see me." The first Christmas after I stopped showing up, I expected something, anything, some sign of a crack in their perfect holiday facade. Maybe a text from my sister asking if I was okay, or a voicemail from my dad, stiff and clipped, saying he hoped I was doing well even if we didn't see eye to eye. But what I got was silence so complete, it felt like falling off the edge of the world. And still, like some twisted masochist with a Wi-Fi connection, I checked their Facebook on Christmas morning, and there it was again, the family photo, this time at some rustic mountain lodge, all of them wrapped in coordinated plaid scarves, mugs of cocoa in hand. Standing in front of a crackling fireplace that looked like it had been photoshopped into existence. I zoomed in, like always, looking for even the smallest hint that I existed somewhere in the background. A picture frame on the mantel, a dog-eared book I'd once owned, anything, but there was nothing. Just smiles and snow and a perfectly framed emptiness where I should have been. That year, my name didn't appear in the family newsletter either. My mom still sent it out in those glossy trifold mailers she had printed at Staples, full of stock phrases and curated updates. Nathan's promotion to regional VP has been such a blessing. Chloe's new condo is finally complete and just gorgeous. We enjoyed a peaceful Christmas surrounded by love and laughter, all wrapped up in the kind of language that screams fake warmth. My copy arrived folded wrong and addressed to Tyler Kuhn, missing a letter in the last name, like even the printer knew I didn't quite belong anymore. But the worst part? I still saved it. I told myself I kept the newsletter because I wanted proof, evidence that I wasn't just imagining the erasure, that it was real and calculated and intentional. But part of me, the lonely part one didn't like to admit existed, kept it because even being excluded by my family felt more grounding than not being mentioned at all. I stuck it in a drawer next to some old receipts and unopened birthday cards from people I'd stopped talking to, a tiny graveyard of moments that had once held potential. The second Christmas was worse, not because they ignored me again, I expected that by then, but because it started to feel like the ignoring was the new normal. I got a card, generic and unsigned, just the Quins embossed in fake gold cursive on the front, with a glittery tree and a quote about peace that made me want to scream. Inside was a typed message that read, "Wishing you health and happiness in the coming year." No names, no photos, no mention of where they were or what they were doing. Just a template from a company that probably didn't even know who I was. That's when I realized they had subscribed to a service that sent out their greetings. I had become one of the hundreds, maybe thousands, on a mailing list they paid for once a year. Not family, just a former connection they couldn't quite delete. I drank too much that night. Sat on my tiny couch in the studio apartment I was renting in San Francisco, staring at the ceiling like it might offer answers, with a bottle of whiskey and a pizza I didn't finish. There was a Charlie Brown special playing on mute, and the blinking lights from the tiny tree I'd put up just to feel something cast long, lonely shadows across the wall. I watched the light flicker, thinking about how many people felt the same quiet ache on nights like this. But somehow it didn't help to know I wasn't alone in the pain. It just made it worse. By year 3, I stopped putting up the tree. Instead, I worked. I coded through the holidays. I stayed at the office late and pretended I was just another entrepreneur grinding through the season, pretending the empty coffee cups and glowing screens were enough to replace family. And it worked, sort of. I started building something real, a prototype that showed promise, a small seed of potential that kept me moving forward. I told myself that if I couldn't have their approval, I'd build something so undeniably successful they'd have to acknowledge me. Maybe not with love, but with respect. Recognition. Anything. But then, during year 4, my sister posted something that broke me in a new way. It was a digital family tree, part of some ancestry project she'd gotten into, all flowcharts and names and dotted lines. Nathan was there, bold and centered, with his wife and their 2 kids smiling beneath his name like photos from a magazine. Chloe was beside him, her name framed with flowers and a brief note about her yoga studio and her dog. My parents were listed at the top, of course, as the roots. But me? I wasn't even a blank space. I wasn't faded or unnamed or connected by a dashed line. I simply wasn't there. I stared at that family tree for hours, zoomed in and out, refreshed the page 3 times like it might suddenly correct itself. But the message was clear. I had been erased not just emotionally but digitally, factually, historically. According to that tree, I had never been born. And it made me wonder, how many times can someone pretend you're dead before you start feeling like maybe you are? That year, I didn't even bother sending gifts. No cards, no emails, nothing. I watched the snow fall outside my window, soft and indifferent, and thought about how strange it is that something so cold can still look beautiful. That's the thing about families like mine, they package cruelty in such pretty wrapping you almost forget it's poison inside. But something shifted in me that winter, something quiet and final. I stopped wishing they'd call. I stopped hoping for a miracle. Instead, I started planning. Not revenge. Not exactly. But something like closure, something public, something sharp enough to be seen and undeniable enough that even they couldn't pretend I didn't exist. And so, when I saw the ad rates for local TV that ran during the Alpine Christmas special, I didn't hesitate. I clicked inquire, then book, then pay, all in one motion like pulling a trigger I'd been holding for years. It wasn't about anger anymore. It was about presence. If they wanted to erase me from the portrait, then fine. This year, I would appear on a much bigger canvas. By the time Christmas rolled around again and the Quinn family began preparing their usual routine of cookie-cutter smiles and dinnerware that hadn't been touched since Clinton was in office, I was knee-deep in contracts, venture capital meetings, and sleepless nights driven not by insomnia but by raw ambition wrapped in years of emotional drought. The startup I'd poured myself into was finally breathing on its own, no more scraped-together funds from friends or sleepless weekends wondering if the servers would crash again, and though I wasn't rich yet, not in the yacht and loafer sense, I had something infinitely more powerful than money. I had momentum. I had proof that I could exist without their blessing. And more than anything, I had people around me, real people, who didn't need me to fit into some old family script where I was either obedient or invisible. I called the company Emberlain, not for any deep poetic reason, but because the name sounded like fire and direction, like something that kept you warm and moving forward even when everything else had gone dark. We started small, just 3 of us holed up in a rented garage that smelled like wet drywall and takeout noodles, building an AI prototype that used speech recognition and sentiment analysis to help veterans with PTSD manage their daily triggers. It wasn't glamorous. It was messy as hell. But it mattered. We knew it mattered because the first beta user cried after hearing their own voice processed back to them in calm, guided tones. Not because we cured anything, but because someone had finally built something that listened without judging. Something that didn't say, get over it, or toughen up the way my father used to when he saw any kind of emotional vulnerability. Funny how the world tries to slap the same labels on you your whole life: failure, dropout, the one who never fits, until suddenly you build something useful, and those same people want to act like they saw it coming. Except my family didn't do that. They didn't suddenly show up with congratulations or flowers or even a smug, "We always knew you had it in you." No, what they did was worse. They started pretending my success belonged to them, just quietly enough that no one would notice unless they knew the history. A mutual friend from back home sent me a screenshot of a Facebook comment my dad had left under a post about a Forbes article I was quoted in, some piece about innovation in mental health tech. His comment read, "Great to see young minds like this out there. Reminds me of someone I know." No tag. No name. Just vague enough to hint but not commit. Just safe enough to allow him the image of fatherly wisdom without the weight of ownership. My sister was even more subtle. She reposted one of our ad campaigns on her Instagram story and wrote, "Proud of this work. So important." As if it were something she'd had a hand in. As if years of silence could be papered over by a swipe-up link and a hollow compliment. I didn't call them out. I didn't comment back. I just watched from a distance, like I had learned to do, and added their behavior to the growing stack of evidence that blood doesn't always mean family. But here's the strange thing about building something from scratch: you end up building a kind of family along with it. There was Marlene, our head of design, who brought her dog to meetings and cried openly when we hit our first funding goal. There was Jay, the systems engineer who barely spoke unless it was about code, but once stayed up with me on Zoom for 10 hours straight while we debugged a crashing interface. And there was Malik, our finance guy, a father of two who told me over late-night burritos that working on Emberlain made him feel like he was doing something his kids could actually be proud of. None of them asked about my parents. None of them cared that I didn't come from money or status, or some polished resume full of Ivy League praise. What they cared about was the mission, the work, and whether I showed up when it counted. And I did. Every damn day. Because showing up was something I never really got from the people who raised me, so I learned to give it to others instead. It was my quiet rebellion, my antidote to their absence. The closer we got to closing our first major deal, a government grant worth more than I'd ever seen in one place, the more I thought about that portrait hanging over the fireplace. I imagined them decorating the living room again, placing ornaments just so, setting out the same wine glasses they only ever used when guests were coming, and framing that airbrushed photo where I'd been edited out like an error in composition. And something inside me clicked, not in anger, but in clarity. I didn't want back in. I didn't want to be in their portrait, not anymore. But I wanted them to see what I'd become, not for their approval, but because hiding it would have meant accepting their judgment. And I was done accepting their silence. That's when I remembered the Alpine Christmas special, the cheesy, overly sentimental TV event they watched religiously every year like it was a sacred mass. It aired locally but reached thousands of households in our town, and for 30 years, my mom had watched it while crying into a cup of peppermint cocoa like her whole identity depended on it. I looked up the ad rates during that special. 6 seconds. That's all I could afford in prime time. It cost more than I should have spent, but I didn't even blink. I booked it anonymously, using our corporate account. And then I sat down to write the message myself. No PR team. No legal filter. Just me, a laptop, and everything I'd ever wanted to say condensed into a few seconds of clean, direct language. It wasn't about revenge. It was about being undeniable. Because sometimes, the only way to answer silence is with a signal they can't turn off. I didn't sleep the night before the shoot, not because I was nervous or unprepared, but because some part of me couldn't quite believe I was actually going through with it, that after all the years of passive neglect and well-manicured indifference, I was finally doing something they couldn't quietly ignore, something loud enough to slice through their curated silence like a hammer to glass. There's something incredibly liberating about making a decision like that, where you stop waiting for closure and instead create your own. Even if it comes in the form of a few seconds on a local TV broadcast sandwiched between a car dealership jingle and some pre-recorded footage of animatronic snowmen. The studio I rented was a converted office space in downtown Oakland, barely large enough to fit the crew I'd hired, but the production manager, a woman named Eliza who wore fingerless gloves and had a face like she'd seen too much coffee and not enough sleep, told me we could make it work with the right lens. She didn't ask a lot of questions, which I appreciated, but she did raise an eyebrow when I told her I wanted the entire 6-second ad to be one continuous shot, no cuts, no music. Just a static frame of me delivering a single line into the camera with my company logo at the bottom. I told her I didn't want polish. I wanted clarity. She said fine, but it was my money. I stood in front of the camera under a flickering softbox that buzzed like a dying flytrap and stared at the little red light blinking back at me, waiting for the cue, and when it came, I took a breath and said the line I'd written in the Notes app on my phone during a layover at Denver Airport 3 weeks earlier, when the idea had first crystallized with a kind of ferocity that made my hands shake. I said, "Some people erase you, but the right ones, they see you." That was it. 6 seconds. No name. No face but mine. Just a black turtleneck, a gray background, and the Emberlain logo appearing quietly in the corner, like a ghost of something once ignored, but now undeniable. We shot it 6 times, not because I flubbed the delivery, but because Eliza wanted options. She said, "You're not an actor, which is good, it's real, but let's get it clean." I nodded, because that made sense. This wasn't supposed to be a performance. This was supposed to be a message, one only a few people in the world would truly understand, and if they didn't, then it wasn't for them in the first place. The final take had something in my eyes that I hadn't seen before, an edge, maybe, or exhaustion. Or maybe just the residue of every unanswered text, every Christmas card addressed without my name, every time my dad looked past me like I was just a guest at the table instead of his own blood. I didn't know what they'd feel when they saw it, or even if they'd admit to watching it, but I knew they'd recognize the face. I hadn't changed that much. My jaw was sharper, my hair a little thinner, my posture a little more sure of itself, but my eyes were the same. And eyes don't lie, not when the wound runs deep. We wrapped in under an hour, and I paid the crew with the same detached efficiency I used when closing a term sheet, firm handshake, eye contact, polite nod. Eliza gave me a look on her way out that I couldn't quite place. It wasn't pity, but it wasn't admiration either. Maybe it was recognition. Maybe she'd done something like this once. Maybe everyone has, in some form, a letter never sent, a voicemail never returned, a message aimed not at reconciliation but acknowledgement. I took the footage home and spent the next 3 nights editing it myself. I could have outsourced it, sure. I knew enough freelancers who could have done it blindfolded, but this felt too personal to delegate. I adjusted the color grading to match the muted palette I remembered from the walls of our family living room, that bland beige wallpaper that tried so hard to seem warm but always felt like it was hiding something colder underneath. I timed the Emberlain logo to fade in right after the final word, soft and steady, with the subtext line in smaller font, "Veteran care." Real connection. Not too flashy, just enough to give context. The hardest part wasn't making the ad. The hardest part was uploading it to the station's ad portal, clicking submit, and realizing that this was it, that in a few days, at exactly 7:44 p.m. during the second act of the Alpine Christmas special, my face would appear on their screen like a ghost stepping out of the static. I could picture it perfectly. My mom holding her glass of red wine, her eyes misty from whatever sentimental nonsense was playing on the TV, and my dad with his phone half-raised, checking stocks during the commercial break. When suddenly the image would cut to me older, sharper, still here. What would they say? Would they pretend it didn't happen? Would they talk over it, as if my voice hadn't just reached across the airwaves and into their curated little world? Or would they finally, even for just a second, see what they had chosen not to see for over a decade? I didn't need an answer. I just needed the question to reach them. As the confirmation email hit my inbox, time-stamped and official, I closed my laptop and sat back in my chair, surrounded by the quiet hum of the apartment, the gentle click of the heater kicking in, and the distant sound of a car alarm echoing down the street. I poured a glass of bourbon, the expensive kind I'd once brought to their house hoping to impress, and I drank to the reality that sometimes the best revenge isn't cruelty or confrontation, it's clarity. It's being seen in a place where they can't look away. And this year, for the first time, I wasn't waiting for a seat at their table. I was building my own and lighting the whole damn room myself. Christmas Eve used to be the loneliest night of the year for me, not because I was physically alone. There had been plenty of years where friends invited me to join their celebrations, coworkers handed over extra plates of food, or some well-meaning acquaintance tried to include me in their awkward family game nights, but because emotionally, spiritually, and in every way that actually mattered, I was always orbiting the season from somewhere far outside its core, never quite allowed to land. It wasn't just the absence of my parents or my siblings that created that ache, it was the idea that I had been excluded on purpose, like someone deciding you didn't belong in the photograph anymore and then smiling while they framed it without you. This year, though, was different not because the loneliness had suddenly evaporated or because I had found some healing epiphany, but because for the first time in over a decade, I had a plan. A pulse. A single flash of control that, however brief, was mine alone. I had carefully timed it down to the second. According to the local TV guide and the scheduling rep I'd spoken with 3 weeks earlier, the second commercial break of the Alpine Christmas special would hit somewhere around 7:43 or 7:44 p.m., depending on regional affiliate time delays. And my 6-second spot was slotted right at the start of that break, meaning that unless they got up to pee or refill their wine glasses with those smug, overpriced vintages they always saved for the holidays, they'd see me. Or, at the very least, they'd hear my voice, a voice they hadn't voluntarily listened to in over 10 years. I didn't make plans that night. I turned down invitations. I ignored texts. I told people I was catching up on some last-minute admin work, but the truth was, I needed to be alone. Not to sulk, not to spiral, but to witness the moment, alone, uninterrupted, just me and the glow of the screen. I ordered Chinese food from the same place I always did on Christmas Eve, a kind of accidental tradition that had turned into ritual, and I cracked a beer while sitting cross-legged on my worn leather couch, eyes fixed on the flat screen like it was the stage for some unspoken reckoning. As the overly saccharine Christmas music filled the room and the special started, I tried not to pace. It was all so familiar, the fake snow, the tinny piano music, the wooden performances delivered by actors who'd clearly been paid in nostalgia instead of talent, but it still struck something in me. Not fondness, exactly. More like muscle memory. The way a particular smell brings you back to a childhood you didn't enjoy, but still remember vividly. And then, just as the second act wrapped with some laughably predictable dramatic pause, the commercial break began. First came an ad for a furniture warehouse clearance sale, some man in a Santa suit shouting about 2-for-1 recliners, then a local jeweler promoting their Love Never Takes a Holiday engagement sale, and then, there I was. For 6 seconds, everything went quiet. No music, no background chatter, no warm filters. Just me, standing in that gray-lit frame, my voice steady and calm as I said, "Some people erase you, but the right ones, they see you." The Emberlain logo flickered in at the bottom corner, minimal and deliberate, and then, just like that, it was over. Gone. Replaced by a dancing elf promoting discounted ham at the regional grocery chain. I didn't move for a full minute after it aired. I didn't breathe hard. I didn't smile. I just sat there, watching the screen, heart ticking in my chest like an old clock in a quiet house, wondering what room they had been in, what angle their faces were turned toward, if their glasses caught the reflection of my face on their screen. Did my mother put her wine glass down? Did my father glance toward the remote with confusion? Did Chloe mutter something under her breath like, "Was that?" while Nathan leaned forward and squinted? Or did they just keep chewing their food, keep talking about meaningless things, keep pretending like I didn't exist even when I was staring right back at them? An hour passed and nothing happened. No phone call, no message, not even a passive-aggressive email or a vague Facebook post. I tried not to be disappointed. I had told myself from the start this wasn't about getting a reaction, it was about reclaiming my place in the world, even if they never acknowledged it. But that's the thing about family wounds, they always expect to be reopened, and no amount of intellectual detachment stops the emotional bleed when silence follows a scream. Then, at 9:06 p.m., my phone buzzed. It wasn't them. It was my cousin, Erin, who I hadn't spoken to in years, but who had always been the closest thing to an ally in that house full of curated coldness. Her message said, "Dude, that was you, wasn't it? Savage. Are you okay?" I stared at it for a long time, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I didn't want to say the wrong thing and spoil the fragile thread that had just reached out in the dark. I wrote back, "Yeah, I'm fine. Just needed them to see." She replied almost instantly, "They're talking about it. Not to you, of course." But it landed. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need to know who said what or which facial expression betrayed the most guilt. I had confirmation. Proof that I hadn't just screamed into the void. I logged onto Instagram, partly out of reflex and partly because some childish part of me still believed maybe, just maybe, they'd say something, anything. And there it was. My mother had posted a photo from their fireplace, the same shot every year, but this time, something was different. The portrait was gone. In its place was a wreath. Just a simple green circle with a red ribbon and nothing else. No picture. No family photo. No sign of curated perfection. The caption read, "Sometimes memories are better left in the past." I laughed. Not a joyful laugh, not a triumphant one. A low, bitter laugh that felt like it had been fermenting in my chest for years. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even close to recognition. But it was something. A shift. A dent. A crack in the ice they'd wrapped themselves in for over a decade. And for once, I didn't need to respond. Because I had already spoken in the only language they seemed to understand: performance, visibility, control. And this time, they couldn't turn the channel. The days that followed the broadcast felt both louder and quieter than I expected, like standing in the eye of a storm you spent years stirring up but never quite believed would reach your doorstep, and for the first time in as long as I could remember. I felt the peculiar heaviness that comes not from rejection, but from being noticed again after so many years of practiced indifference. There was no explosion, no public meltdown, no dramatic scene from my parents' side, just a strange, undeniable ripple, subtle but certain, like something had shifted beneath the surface, even if no one would dare say it aloud. By Christmas morning, I had 300 new messages in my inbox. Most were from strangers, some who'd seen the ad on TV, some who'd caught a clip circulating online, and many more who had read about Emberlain's government deal, which, by some cosmic timing I hadn't intended but welcomed anyway, was officially announced on the same day. Suddenly, my name was being passed around in tech newsletters and local news features, not as a cautionary dropout story or the misunderstood black sheep of the Quins, but as a founder with a vision and something to say. And people were listening. Messages poured in from veterans, from their spouses, from nurses working double shifts in understaffed clinics who said that even if the platform wasn't perfect yet, it was trying, and that mattered. One man wrote, "No one listens to guys like me anymore. Whatever you're building, keep going." Another woman sent a voice note in broken English just to say thank you because her father, a former Marine, had used Emberlain's test version to record a journal entry for the first time in years. But under all that, buried beneath the metrics and the praise and the sudden, surreal taste of public relevance, was something colder. I kept checking my phone every morning. Not for praise. Not for deals. But for a number I still had saved under home. It never lit up. Not even once. Instead, what I got were indirect signs that I had successfully disrupted their little ecosystem of denial. A friend from high school sent me a screenshot of a group chat with my sister in it. Chloe had posted a passive-aggressive comment about people making their trauma into marketing, followed by a handful of eye-roll emojis and a laughing reaction from Nathan. Another cousin messaged me, unsure whether they were being supportive or cautious, saying, You really stirred the pot, man. Guess the holidays won't be so quiet this year. I didn't answer that one. I didn't know how. There's a specific type of hollowness that comes after the thing you've been planning, obsessing over, sacrificing for, actually works. Not because it didn't satisfy, but because part of you realizes the revenge never really mattered as much as the hurt that caused it. And no commercial, no viral moment, no perfectly timed call-out in prime time could fix what had never even been acknowledged. The startup world, meanwhile, didn't care about the context of my TV spot. They cared that our site traffic tripled overnight, that our mailing list doubled in 2 days, that suddenly Emberlain was being talked about in rooms we hadn't even been invited into yet. I got messages from VCs who had passed on us months earlier, suddenly reconsidering the alignment potential. A few even praised the ad like it had been a calculated branding move, which would have been laughable if it hadn't felt so predictably opportunistic. One investor, a slick-talking former banker who always reminded me of the guys my dad played golf with, called me directly and said, "That ad was genius, man. Had no idea you were such a storyteller. Authenticity's hot right now." I didn't correct him. I just said thanks and ended the call. What do you say to a man who thinks your deepest wound is a marketing strategy? I went back to the office the day after Christmas, not because there was anything urgent to do, but because I didn't know where else to go. The streets were half empty, dusted in leftover glitter and the early crust of snow, and inside the building, it smelled like stale coffee and ambition. Jay was already there, headphones on, typing furiously into a terminal window like the world outside hadn't shifted at all. Marlene came in later with her dog and a box of gingerbread cookies no one touched. Everyone said congratulations or some version of it. But they all looked at me a little differently now, like I'd done something bold and public, like I wasn't just their founder anymore, I was a symbol of something else. And still, in the quiet moments between code reviews and Slack messages, I kept thinking about the look on my father's face, the one I didn't see but could imagine perfectly, the confusion, the realization, the simmering shame he'd never admit to. I imagined my mother turning off the television in silence, wiping her eyes, but saying nothing. Maybe Chloe made a sarcastic comment. Maybe Nathan left. Maybe they all moved on, plates of food in hand, pretending nothing had happened. But I don't think they did. Because later that week, without explanation or fanfare, my mother unfollowed me on Instagram. It's a stupid detail. Trivial. Meaningless, almost. But it felt like something, like a final, digital flinch. She didn't block me. Just unfollowed. No message. No confrontation. Just a quiet, familiar ghosting in a new format. And for some reason, that hit harder than anything else. Because even when confronted with the undeniable, they still chose denial. Still chose the silence. Still chose the portrait with the missing face. But here's the thing. This time, I wasn't waiting for them to fill the frame. I had built my own. Not for them. Not even for myself entirely. But for everyone else who's been airbrushed out, cropped away, or told in subtle, rehearsed tones that they were never quite enough to be part of the final version. Let them sit in their edited perfection. I've got other things to build now. The week after New Year's passed in a blur of cold mornings and fluorescent-lit meetings, the city grinding forward with that mechanical post-holiday rhythm where everyone pretends they're refreshed and ready for a new start. But the truth is, most people are just waiting for something real to break through the monotony, something they don't have to fake enthusiasm for. I worked through it all, not because I had to anymore, but because momentum had become its own kind of medicine. Keep moving, keep building, keep filling the space that others had hollowed out of you. And yet, with every milestone Emberlain hit and every new article praising our work, I felt a strange numbness tightening around the parts of me that had once been hungry for validation. Like the hunger itself had finally eaten everything it could and didn't know what to consume next. Then, out of nowhere, I decided to drive. No plan. No suitcase. No announcement. I just woke up one morning, skipped the office, tossed on a coat that still smelled like the shoot day in Oakland, and started heading east. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even Jay, who probably assumed I was at some meeting with investors or zoning out at a coffee shop like I did when the walls of our office started closing in. The drive took 6 hours and change, the same old roads I'd traveled 100 times before, each mile scraping open memories I'd worked hard to bury. It was just past dusk when I pulled onto their street, that pristine cul-de-sac lined with perfectly trimmed hedges and motion-activated lanterns that clicked on like a row of suspicious eyes as I rolled past. Their house hadn't changed, not the shutters, not the wreaths still clinging to the double doors, not even the same ceramic angel perched awkwardly on the front step like it had been forgotten there since 2005. And that made sense, didn't it? Stagnation disguised as tradition, that had always been their specialty. I didn't get out of the car. I didn't want a scene. I didn't even want a conversation. I just wanted to see it. I wanted to see the windows lit from the inside, the silhouettes moving behind gauzy curtains, the echoes of laughter that sounded practiced, the clink of cutlery and the low hum of background music that made everything feel like a showroom version of what home was supposed to be. I sat there in the idling car for maybe 20 minutes, staring at the life that had gone on so cleanly without me, and I realized something I hadn't fully accepted before. They weren't going to come back. Not ever. Not halfway. Not with a text or a call or a whispered apology behind closed doors. That kind of thing only happens in movies, the kind my mother used to cry at before turning around and ignoring the bleeding parts of her own family like they were just plot points she didn't agree with. So I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out the envelope. Inside was a photograph, not an ad, not a polished company logo, but an actual photo, printed on thick paper, the kind that still smelled like ink. It was me, standing in front of the Emberlain sign outside our office, arms crossed, face forward, not smiling but not angry either. Just present. Whole. Not begging to be loved. Just refusing to be forgotten. On the back, I'd written 2 words, still here. I stepped out of the car, the air sharp and dry against my face, and walked quietly to the mailbox, slipping the envelope inside like I was planting a seed in frozen soil. I didn't knock. I didn't wait. I got back in the car and started driving away before I could think too much about it. The truth is, I don't know what happened next. I don't know if they found the photo that night or if it sat untouched in that mailbox for days until someone cleared out the junk mail. I don't know if my mother held it in her hands and felt that old twitch in her chest, the one that comes when you realize you made a decision you can't unmake. I don't know if my father said anything at all or just muttered something dismissive and went back to polishing his wine glass like nothing had ever touched him. And maybe I'll never know. But that uncertainty, that space where something might grow or might simply rot, that's the most honest ending I could hope for. Because families aren't fairy tales, and closure doesn't always arrive with a neat little bow. Sometimes the people who were supposed to love you simply don't. Or they do, in a way so twisted and conditional it ceases to resemble love at all. And sometimes you build something beautiful from that absence, not to show them what they lost, but to prove to yourself that you never needed their permission to begin with. This year, there was no portrait on their wall. I wasn't in the frame. But maybe, just maybe, for 1 second, when the light from the TV flickered, or when my name showed up in a news segment they couldn't ignore, or when they held that photo in their hands, they remembered. They remembered the kid who asked too many questions. The son who wouldn't wear the sweater. The brother who wasn't willing to be cropped out quietly. And maybe that's enough. Maybe being remembered is better than being framed. Because this year, I didn't want to be part of the picture. I just wanted them to know that I was never gone.